What if I told you that the biggest reason most people never build real wealth has nothing to do with how much they earn? It's not your job title, it's not your degree, and it's definitely not just inflation or the economy. Those are the obvious things people blame. But the real reason is far quieter. It slips under the radar. You won't see headlines about it, and no one really warns you about it growing up. It's something that feels completely normal, safe even. It doesn't trigger fear or urgency, which is exactly why it's so dangerous. Because when something doesn't feel like a problem, you don't fix it. You don't question it. You just continue, day after day, year after year. Think about this for a second. You get paid, your salary comes in, and as long as your bills are covered and there's a bit left over, you feel like you're doing okay. You might even tell yourself you're being responsible. You're not overspending, you're not drowning in debt, you're just comfortable, and comfort feels like success. But that's the illusion. Because while you're sitting in that comfort, your money is sitting too. It's not growing, it's not working, it's not building anything meaningful for your future. It's just existing. And every year that passes, that okay financial situation quietly costs you more than you realize. This is what makes it so powerful. There's no dramatic failure moment, no big financial mistake that shocks you into action. Instead, it's a slow leak, a silent drift away from what's actually possible for you. You don't notice it in a week or a month, but over 5, 10, 20 years, the gap becomes massive. And the most frustrating part? From the outside, everything looks fine. You're functioning, you're earning, you're surviving. No one questions it, including you. But underneath that surface, there's untapped potential just sitting there unused. This is the trap that keeps people stuck. Not because they're lazy or incapable, but because they've accepted a version of financial life that feels good enough. And once you accept good enough, you stop searching for better. You stop asking questions. You stop optimizing. So the real question isn't whether you're doing badly with money. Most people aren't. The real question is whether you're unknowingly settling, whether you've confused stability with progress, because those two things are not the same. And once you see that, once you realize that the biggest threat to your wealth isn't chaos but comfort, everything starts to shift. Most people assume that building wealth is all about earning more money. Get a higher paying job, start a side hustle, work longer hours. That's the formula we've all been told. And while income does matter, it's only one piece of the puzzle. Because what truly determines your financial future isn't just how much you earn, it's how intentionally you use what you already have. There's a gap that exists in everyone's financial life. The gap between what your money could be doing and what it's actually doing right now. And that gap is where wealth is either built or quietly lost. It shows up in ways that seem harmless. Your savings sitting in a basic account earning little to nothing. Money that could be invested but isn't because you're waiting for the right time. Subscriptions you barely notice leaving your account each month. Small spending habits that feel insignificant in the moment but compound over time. None of these decisions feel like mistakes. That's what makes them so easy to ignore. You're not making a big obvious error. You're not losing money in a dramatic way. Instead, you're slowly missing out on opportunities. And missed opportunities are incredibly expensive. They just don't come with a warning sign. For example, delaying investing by even a few years might not seem like a big deal today. But over time, that delay can cost you a significant portion of your potential returns. Not because you did something wrong, but because you didn't act soon enough. Because you stayed in that space of, I'll get to it later. And later is where wealth disappears. The same goes for awareness. When you don't regularly check in on your finances, you default to autopilot. Money flows in, money flows out, and as long as nothing feels broken, you assume everything is fine. But without intention, your financial system doesn't improve. It just repeats. And repetition without optimization is where the problem lies. You might be saving, but are you saving in the most effective way? You might be investing, but are your investments aligned with your goals? You might be spending responsibly, but are you spending deliberately? These are the questions most people never ask. Not because they don't care, but because everything feels good enough already. But here's the reality. Small inefficiencies compound just as powerfully as good decisions do. A slightly better return, a slightly smarter allocation, a slightly more intentional habit, these things don't seem life-changing in isolation. But over years, they create a completely different outcome. This is why two people earning the same salary can end up in entirely different financial positions. It's not about who worked harder. It's about who paid attention, who closed that gap between potential and action, because wealth isn't built through one perfect decision. It's built through consistent, intentional ones. And every time you ignore that gap, every time you choose convenience over clarity, you're allowing that wealth to slip further away. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, and consistently. At some point, if you really want to change your financial life, you have to confront a slightly uncomfortable truth. Being good with money isn't enough. Paying your bills on time, saving a little each month, avoiding debt, these are all solid habits. But they're the baseline, not the finish line. The real shift happens when you stop measuring your finances by stability and start measuring them by efficiency. Because stability can keep you stuck for years. When everything feels under control, there's no urgency to improve. You're not stressed, you're not struggling, so naturally, you assume you're on the right path. But wealth isn't built by staying on autopilot. It's built by being intentional, by questioning, by constantly asking, is this the best my money could be doing? That question changes everything. Instead of letting your salary just flow through your life, you start directing it. You begin to see money less as something you spend and more as something you deploy. Every pound, dollar, or rupee becomes a decision point, a choice between short-term comfort and long-term growth. And this is where most people hesitate, because optimization requires effort. It requires you to look at things you've been ignoring, to admit that maybe your current system isn't as effective as it could be, and more importantly, it requires you to move beyond what feels easy. Comfort is predictable. Optimization is intentional. When you start thinking like this, your habits begin to change. You don't just save whatever is left at the end of the month, you decide in advance where your money goes. You don't leave large sums sitting idle, you ask whether they could be working harder elsewhere. You don't blindly accept expenses, you evaluate whether they actually add value to your life. It's a more active relationship with money. And over time, that activity compounds. You start noticing opportunities you would have previously missed. A better savings rate here, a smarter investment there, a cost you can eliminate, a system you can improve. None of these changes feel dramatic on their own, but together they create momentum. And momentum is what separates people who build wealth from those who stay in the same place for years. Another important shift is how you view time. Most people underestimate how powerful time is in finance, not just in terms of investing, but in terms of decision-making. The earlier you optimize, the less effort you need later. The longer you delay, the harder it becomes to catch up. So instead of thinking, I'll fix this when I earn more, you start thinking, how can I make the most of what I have right now? That mindset is powerful because it puts you back in control. You stop waiting for external changes, a promotion, a pay rise, a better economy, and start focusing on internal ones. Your habits, your awareness, your decisions. Because at the end of the day, wealth isn't just about numbers. It's about behavior. And once your behavior shifts from passive to intentional, from comfortable to optimized, you're no longer just maintaining your finances. You're actively building something. Something that grows, compounds, and moves you forward instead of keeping you in the same place. At this point, the idea isn't just to understand the problem, it's to actually do something about it. Because awareness without action doesn't change anything. You can know exactly what's holding you back, but if your behavior stays the same, your results will too. So the focus now becomes simple. How do you move from passive to intentional with your money? It starts with clarity. You need to know where your money is going, not in a vague sense, but in detail. Most people underestimate how powerful this step is. When you actually sit down and track your spending, patterns start to appear. You notice what's necessary, what's optional, and what's quietly draining your finances without adding much value. This isn't about restriction, it's about awareness. Because you can't improve what you don't measure. Once you have that clarity, the next step is to remove friction from the good decisions. One of the biggest reasons people delay investing or saving properly is because it requires constant effort. You have to remember, you have to decide, you have to act. And over time, that mental load leads to inconsistency. The solution is automation. When your investments and savings happen automatically, you take emotion and hesitation out of the equation. You're no longer relying on motivation, you're relying on a system. From there, it becomes about building knowledge. Not in an overwhelming way, but consistently. You don't need to become a financial expert overnight, but you do need to stay engaged. Even a small amount of regular learning compounds over time. It helps you make better decisions, avoid common mistakes, and spot opportunities you would have otherwise missed. The key is consistency, not intensity. Another important part of this process is challenging your own comfort. This is where real growth happens. If everything about your financial routine feels easy and familiar, there's a good chance you're not pushing yourself enough. That doesn't mean taking reckless risks, but it does mean questioning whether you're truly making the most of your situation. Are you exploring better options? Are you settling for convenience? Are you avoiding decisions because they feel complicated? Growth often sits just outside that comfort zone. And finally, it's about alignment. Your money should reflect your priorities. If something matters to you, freedom, security, flexibility, your financial decisions should support that. Otherwise, you end up working hard for money that isn't actually improving your life in a meaningful way. Being intentional means making sure every financial choice has a purpose behind it. None of this requires perfection. You don't need the perfect plan or the perfect timing. What matters is that you start. Small adjustments made consistently create momentum. And once that momentum builds, everything becomes easier. Because in the end, building wealth isn't about one big breakthrough. It's about a series of deliberate choices repeated over time. Choices that move you away from autopilot and toward control. And once you take control, even in small ways, you're no longer at the mercy of your habits. You're shaping them.